Toby just bit me because I tried to throw out a cardboard box. That was the first thing I yelled to my sister over the phone, and I meant it. Okay, it wasn't a full bite, more like a nip, but still. Toby, my 12-year-old golden retriever, the same dog who once backed away from a cricket because it looked at him funny, had just lunged at me when I tried to toss a beat-up box into the recycling. That's not normal, not for Toby. It all started that morning. I finally had a free Saturday and decided to clean out the garage. Coffee in hand, sleeves rolled up, I started hauling out dusty boxes and old decorations. Toby, always happy to tag along, padded behind me, tail wagging like a metronome. Then I found it, a plain, crumpled cardboard box with nothing written on it. I nudged it with my foot. It caved in a bit. Total trash, I thought, but Toby barked, loud and sudden. When I reached for it, he jumped between me and the bin. He growled, not playfully, not like before. His eyes locked on mine, and then he lunged. His teeth barely grazed my wrist, but it wasn't about the bite. It was the message. Don't throw that away. I dropped the box, and Toby immediately lay down beside it, placing a paw on top like he was guarding treasure. That's when I called Susan. Are you bleeding? She asked. Barely, I said. It's not the bite, it's that he's never done anything like this. What's in the box? I don't know. He won't let me near it. Then don't toss it, bring it inside, let him protect it, maybe he remembers something. So I did. I set the box in the corner of the living room. Toby stayed right there, paw still resting on it. The rest of the day I tried to act normal, watched football, vacuumed, even washed dishes by hand, but I kept glancing at that box, and at Toby, who never left it. By dinner time, I gave in. I sat nearby and said, "What is it, buddy? You know I'd never throw away anything important." He looked at me, then nudged the box with his nose. You want me to open it? Tail wag. I slid closer, carefully opened the lid. The cardboard crackled like it had soaked in every season since Dad died. Inside were layers of yellowed newspaper, and under them, a red flannel blanket, the one Dad kept in his old truck, the one I thought Mum threw out after he passed. Toby let out a soft whine. There was more. A photo album sealed in plastic, a squirrel-shaped squeaky toy, Toby's first, and at the bottom, a small velvet box. It wasn't dusty. I opened it, and there it was. Dad's watch, the one he wore every day, the one we never found after he collapsed on that hiking trip. My hands shook. I gasped. Toby nudged me, whimpering softly, the same sound he made the day we buried Dad. "Oh my God, Toby," I whispered. "You remembered. You saved this." I sank to the floor as memories came rushing back. Dad's truck, wind in our hair, Toby's. Nose out the window, that blanket over my lap, the toy rolling under the seat. I don't know how that box ended up buried in the garage. Maybe I hid it during the fog of grief. Maybe Mom did, but Toby didn't forget. That night, I let him curl, up on the couch beside me, wrapped in the blanket. He fell asleep with his head on my lap, the old squeaky toy between his paws. I didn't sleep much. I kept looking at the photo album, the watch. That box felt like a message from the past, or maybe just a reminder. Some things, and some dogs. Remember, love, even when we forget. Tomorrow I'd look through the photo album, but tonight I just sat with Toby, grateful for the kind of love that never lets go. The next morning felt almost holy, the kind of quiet that makes you pause. I woke up with Toby curled against my legs, his breathing soft and steady. The red flannel blanket still covered us, and his old squeaky squirrel toy rested by his paw like a tiny guard. I didn't want to move, but the sun was sneaking through the blinds, and life was calling, like it always does. I slipped out from under the blanket, careful not to wake him. Toby stretched with a lazy yawn and followed me to the kitchen just like always. My phone buzzed. "Susan, any updates on your haunted box? Or has Toby reclaimed it as his kingdom?" I laughed and texted back, "Turns out the box was full of memories. I'll tell you more later." I poured my coffee and stood in front of the box, now tucked under the coffee table. On top sat Dad's old watch in its velvet case, still closed. Beside it was the photo album, just waiting. I hesitated. Opening it felt like inviting in a wave that might crash too hard. But Toby sat next to me, tail wagging slow and steady. I took it as his way of saying, "It's okay." The plastic bag was stiff with age, but the album inside was well kept. Brown, leather with gold trim, the kind Dad used for special memories. I opened to the first page and it hit me like a hug and a gut punch at the same time. There I was, about 4 or 5, standing in front of Dad's blue truck, holding a floppy-eared, "Puppy Toby." My overalls were grass-stained. Toby's tongue hung out in joy, and Dad stood behind us, hand on my shoulder, smiling. June 2009. Page after page told our story. Toby's first bath, Dad teaching me to throw a baseball while Toby leapt after it like it was his job. Birthday parties, camping trips, sunlit afternoons. It was a scrapbook of love I hadn't looked at in years. Toby rested his chin on my knee, watching me flip through the past. Every now and then he'd grunt or sigh like he was remembering too. Then I came to a photo that stopped me. It wasn't our house, not Grandma's either. A room, with wood paneling, a stone fireplace and a green recliner. Dad sat in it, holding me in one arm and Toby in the other. December 2013. "Do you remember this place?" I asked Toby. He perked up. I studied the background, a painting of mountains over a lake. Something about it stuck. I snapped a picture and texted Susan. "Do you know where this is?" She replied almost right away. "That looks like Grandpa Charlie's old cabin in Pinefield. We used to go there every winter, remember?" I didn't, but Toby walked to the front door. "Tail up, ready? You want to go?" I asked. He barked once. I couldn't believe it. This dog was connecting dots in my heart I didn't even know were missing. Maybe it was scent. Maybe it was love. Either way, I wasn't about to ignore it. I called Susan. "You're not seriously thinking of driving up there today?" "I think I have to. Toby remembers something." She sighed but said, "Okay, I'll text you the address. Just be careful." Half an hour later, Toby and I were in my truck with snacks, water, and the photo album. The sky was clear, the air crisp. Toby sat alert, head up, ready. It took 2 hours to get to Pinefield. The road twisted through tall pines, past leaning mailboxes and fading signs of life. When I saw the wooden sign for Pine Hollow Cabin Road, I turned. The cabin stood just like I remembered from the photo, weathered but strong, like time had taken a break to let it rest. Moss clung to the shingles, vines curled around the porch, but it was still home. Toby jumped out and went straight to the front steps like he'd been there yesterday. I followed. The spare key was right where Susan said it would be, in the flower pot by the door. Inside it smelled like cedar and old books. Dust floated in golden sunlight. It was exactly like the picture. The recliner, the fireplace, the painting. Toby walked the room once, then sat right in front of the fireplace and looked up. I stared at the painting. Something was hidden behind it. Climbing onto the arm of the recliner, I gently lifted the frame. Behind it was a hollow space carved into the wood, just big enough to hold a small tin box. Inside were letters, every one addressed to me from Dad. My breath caught. I sat down slowly, tin box in my lap. Toby curled beside me like he'd always known this moment was coming. The first letter was dated the week before Dad's last hiking trip. My hands shook as I opened it. "If you're reading this, I hope you're older, maybe even stronger than you feel right now." He wanted me to have something to hold on to if he couldn't be there, proof that I was always the best part of his day. I couldn't read more right away. The tears came too. Fast. Toby nosed my hand, then licked my cheek. We sat there for hours. I read every letter. Each one was a piece of him. His stories, his jokes, his memories. Some even had little drawings of Toby as a pup. When I finished, I looked down at Toby. "You brought me here. You brought me back." He barked once, then curled up at my feet. That night we stayed in the cabin. I built a fire with the old wood outside. Wrapped in the red flannel blanket, Toby and I drifted off to sleep to the soft crackling of flames and his steady breathing. That tin box wasn't just a box. It was a treasure map. And somehow, this old dog had remembered every stop. The next morning didn't start with birds or alarms. It started with Toby pressing his wet nose to my cheek and giving a soft, insistent huff. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, and my back ached from sleeping on the floor. But I hadn't slept that deeply in years. The letters were still beside me in their tin box. The last one had a list scribbled on the back in Dad's handwriting. Toby's squirrel. The flannel 3 Pine Hollow cabinet felt like a scavenger hunt he'd left behind, or maybe a trail he'd hoped I'd follow one day. After a quick breakfast of oatmeal and old coffee, I leashed up Toby and we headed outside. The air was cold and fresh, the kind that wakes up your whole body. Toby bounded off the porch like he was a puppy again. Behind the cabin, a narrow trail led into the woods. I barely remembered it, but Toby sure did. He took the lead, nose to the ground, like he had a mission. We walked for about half an hour, quiet but comfortable. Squirrels darted through the trees, and leaves crunched under our feet. Sunlight streamed down through the branches in warm, golden streaks. Then, Toby stopped. He barked once and sat. In front of us was a mossy, fallen log. At first it looked like nothing special, but then I saw a faded wooden sign nailed to a nearby tree. Memory spot. A wave of recognition hit me. Dad used to call this place our secret fort. We'd come here during summer trips and build little worlds with sticks and pine cones. Toby would lie in the sun, while I covered him in leaves, pretending he was a camouflaged explorer. I sat on the log, and Toby lay down beside me like he remembered, too. Then I spotted something buried near the roots of a tree, a rusted tin lunchbox. Heart-pounding, I opened it. Inside were tiny treasures, a toy compass, a plastic sheriff's badge, and a folded piece of blue construction paper that read, Toby's Adventure Club. Underneath was a note from Dad. If you find this, it means you followed the trail. And if you followed the trail, it means you still believe in the magic we made. Don't ever lose that. I laughed through tears. How could I have forgotten all this? We stayed a while longer, soaking in the quiet forest and the forgotten pieces of myself. Eventually, Toby stood and stretched. I followed him back to the cabin. I made lunch and wrote down everything we'd found. There had to be more. Dad's list, Toby's squirrel, the flannel, pine hollow, they were all here, but something still felt unfinished. Later that afternoon, I noticed a pull-down staircase in the hallway ceiling. I hadn't realized the cabin even had an attic. Dust sprinkled down as I pulled the cord. Toby wagged his tail at the bottom of the ladder. The attic was small and slanted, full of old boxes, winter coats, board games, old magazines. But in the far corner, one box looked newer. I opened the box. Inside was a VHS tape in a clear plastic case labeled For Future Laughs. Next to it was a small portable VHS player with a sticky note. Needs charging. Plug in, kitchen. I carried everything downstairs. While the player charged, I took Toby out back and tossed his squeaky squirrel. He brought it back slower than he used to, but I didn't mind. When we came back in, the green light blinked. Ready? I slid in the tape and hit play. The screen flickered, and there was Dad grinning behind the camera. All right, sport, he said, turning it toward me. Tell the camera what we're doing today. My younger voice answered, all full of excitement. We're building a memory box so we remember everything when we're old and boring. Dad laughed. Speak for yourself. I plan on being young and boring. The video jumped between clips. Me and Toby running through the woods, Dad helping me build a birdhouse, the three of us roasting marshmallows by a fire. Then it paused on a quieter moment. Dad was sitting alone, looking right into the camera. If you ever find this, he said softly, it means time's past. Maybe I'm not around. Maybe you're older. Maybe Toby's an old man by now. But I hope this brought a smile to your face. I paused the tape. Toby lay next to me, his head resting on the tin box of letters. I looked at him. You knew, I whispered. Somehow, he really had known. That evening, Susan called. How's the emotional treasure hunt going? I told her everything. She was quiet for a bit, then said, you should make something out of this, a book, a video, something. People need stories like this. I hadn't thought of that, but once she said it, it didn't sound crazy. I looked at Toby, still watching me, still guarding these memories. Maybe he was guiding me towards something bigger. Maybe he was guiding me back to myself. It rained all night. By morning, the ground was soft, the air damp, and fog drifted between the trees. I sat on the porch, wrapped in the red flannel blanket, sipping coffee. Toby sat next to me like a statue, watching the mist like it was a movie. Outside, everything felt calm. Inside, my mind was spinning. Dad's letters, the video, the secret fort in the woods. It felt like we were still on a trail, still following clues. And I couldn't shake the feeling that there was one last piece left. After breakfast, I laid everything out on the cabin table. The photos, the letters, the notes. I went through them slowly, searching for anything I'd missed. Then I saw it. A photo I'd passed over before. It was Dad and me on a dock. I was about 7, legs dangling over the edge. Toby was swimming toward us. Behind us was a boathouse with a sign that read, Stillwater. That wasn't the name of the lake near Pinefield. Stillwater was somewhere else. I remembered the name from a long-ago weekend trip. I flipped back through Dad's letters. One of them, dated just months before his accident, mentioned it. If you ever find your way back to Stillwater, he'd written, check the North Dock. We left a little something there, just in case. My pulse kicked up. I searched online. Stillwater Lake, an hour and a half south, public access, a few cabins along the shore. An old tourism photo showed a boathouse that matched the one in our picture. I looked at Toby. "Want to go for another ride?" He barked once and headed for the door. The drive was quiet. Toby rode with his head out the window, ears flapping. In the wind. When we pulled into the gravel lot, he jumped out before I could leash him and ran straight for the north dock. I followed, heart pounding. The dock creaked under my feet. Toby stopped at the edge, staring at the boathouse. I looked where he was looking, and there it was. A small wooden box tucked under the railing. I knelt, pulled it loose. The hinges were rusted, but the box popped open. Inside was a folded map and a sealed envelope with my name on it. I sat down next to Toby and opened the envelope first. "If you found this, it means you kept following the trail. It means you still believe in chasing memories. There's one last place I want you to go, back to where it all began. The house where you first met Toby. There's something in the yard we never told you about." My heart swelled. That house wasn't far. After Dad passed, we sold it. I hadn't been back since. But I remembered the yard like it was yesterday. The tire swing, the old treehouse, the patch of clover where Toby used to roll until he turned green. I looked out over the lake and whispered, "Thank you," as if it had been holding on to this secret all these years. Then we drove. The house looked mostly the same. Shutters were blue now instead of green. I parked across the street and just stared for a bit. It felt like stepping into a dream. I knocked, and an older man named Ray answered. After I explained everything, he smiled kindly and said, "Sometimes I see that dog of yours by the tree out back." Didn't know if he was visiting or remembering. Out in the yard, Toby ran straight to the old treehouse stump and started sniffing like a dog on a mission. Ray watched him and said, "Dig if you need to. That dog seems to know more than we ever will." I found a garden trowel in the shed and dug where Toby scratched. A few inches down, I hit something. It was a small, rusted metal chest. Inside were my old drawings, a baseball glove, some letters tied with twine, and a notebook labeled Toby's journal. I opened it. Day 1. Toby came home. He licked my ear and stole my sock. Mom says he's a good judge of character. I think he knows I'm his. The tears came quick. Page after page, Dad had written about my childhood through his eyes. First days of school, late night talks, bike rides, always Toby by my side. I sat under the tree for hours reading while Toby rested against me, tail thumping gently. As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, Ray brought out 2 glasses of lemonade. "I think your dad knew," he said softly. "He knew you'd come back, and he knew that dog would lead you here." That night I didn't go back to the cabin. I booked a room at a nearby motel. Toby curled up on the bed beside me, snoring lightly. There were still more pages to read, more memories waiting. Whatever this journey was, it wasn't finished, and Toby wasn't done showing the way. The motel smelled like cheap soap and lemon. Cleaner, but I didn't care. Toby slept in his usual tight little ball, squirrel toy tucked under his paws like treasure. I sat cross-legged on the bed, reading Dad's handwriting in the dim yellow light. Some entries were funny little lists. Others felt like quiet confessions. Words meant for me for a time when Dad couldn't say them out loud anymore. One entry hit me hard. It was written just before Toby's first birthday. "Toby always waits by the front door when you leave for school, watches until your bus disappears, then curls up with your sock on the rug. That dog doesn't just love you, he guards your joy like it's his job. Someday, if you forget who you are or what matters, follow him. He'll bring you home." I read it 3 times. The words sank in deep. Toby had been doing exactly that, all along. The next morning, we walked aimlessly through town. Some things had changed, but there were still familiar pieces. The bakery with the crooked window, the park fountain where I used to toss pennies and make forgotten wishes. I let Toby lead. He pulled gently on the leash, like he had a plan, stopped in front of a white picket fence and sniffed the air. It was the Mallisters' house. Tyler, their son, had been my best friend. We spent entire summers running through sprinklers, digging in the backyard for buried treasure. The house had aged, but the old maple tree was still there, still holding the swing we hung when we were 10. Something pulled me forward. I opened the gate and walked to the tree. I remembered burying something here with Tyler, a super important secrets box. I knelt down, brushed aside some leaves. Toby started digging. Within minutes, we found it. A tin lunchbox sealed with tape. Inside were scribbled notes, toy soldiers, marbles, a tiny flashlight that still worked. Tyler and I had written our best and worst memories, maps to good climbing trees, even made a promise to be friends forever. I was still laughing when a woman came out of the house. "Can I help you?" she asked. I stood, brushing dirt off my jeans. "Sorry," I said. "I used to live next door. I'm just Visiting. I think I left part of my childhood under your tree, I said. She smiled. You must be Jack. Tyler's talked about you. He moved to Oregon, but he still brings you up sometimes. You were kind of a legend here. I told her about the box. She introduced herself as Lorna and invited me in for coffee. Her parents had bought the house from the Mallisters, and she remembered playing there as a kid. She let me sit on the porch with Toby while I sipped coffee and looked through the tin box. At the bottom was a note, not from me or Tyler, but from Dad. If you find this, it means your dog has a better memory than either of you. Go to the fairgrounds. Look behind the red booth where you won your first ribbon. There's one more thing waiting. The town fairgrounds. I hadn't been there since I was 13. That was the year I entered Toby in the kids' dog show. He'd won friendliest. Faced her, and you'd have thought he'd won gold at the Olympics. The memory made me smile. As soon as I grabbed the leash, Toby stood up like he already knew. The fairgrounds were quiet, empty of the crowds and noise, like the place itself was waiting for us. We made our way to the red booth. Behind it, half buried, in weeds, was a small plastic bin sealed with duct tape. I opened it right there on the gravel. Inside was the ribbon, still intact, just a little wrinkled, and underneath, a Polaroid of me holding it up, while Toby jumped beside me, mouth open, in a big happy bark. You could see Dad's shadow behind the camera, on the back in marker. This was the day you said you wanted to become someone dogs could be proud of. You already are. I couldn't speak. I sat down, held the photo to my chest. Toby curled up, next to me with a quiet grunt, like this moment had been waiting for us all along. We stayed there a long while, watching the sky shift. Later that evening at the motel, I called Susan again. I told her everything, about the fairgrounds, the ribbon, the box at the old house. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "It's not just memories, Jack. It's a map of who you've always been. Maybe Toby wasn't guarding that first box. Maybe he was guarding you. The person he knew was still in there." Her words stuck with me long after the call ended. There were still unopened letters in the tin. And who knew how many more places Toby remembered? I wasn't in a rush. Some journeys are better taken slow, and this one was led by a kind of love that never forgets. The next morning I noticed Toby limping a little, just a slight favoring of his right leg, but I saw it right away. He was 12 now, a miracle already for a dog his size, and with all the walking we'd done, it wasn't surprising. Still, my chest tightened at the sight of it. We kept our morning walk short, just a stroll around the block. Toby didn't complain, but he looked back at the truck a few times, like he had something more in mind. Back at the room, I gave him water and laid out his blanket by the window. He settled in but kept watching me, like he was waiting for me to realize something. I opened the notebook again, rereading Dad's last entries, hunting for clues I might have missed. One paragraph stood out. It was a memory about a beach trip we'd taken in the spring, just the three of us. You built a sandcastle the size of a car and crowned Toby as king of the shore. We buried a toy under it, said it was his royal treasure. You insisted we mark the spot with a driftwood X. I sat up straight. That beach wasn't far. I remembered it vaguely. A quiet spot near an old pier, mostly forgotten except by seagulls and fishermen. Mom used to call it our secret coast. Looked at Toby. "What do you say, king of the shore? One more adventure?" He wagged his tail twice. The drive was long, but the world had softened into spring. Flowers lined the roads. The breeze felt warm through the open windows. Toby slept. In the back seat this time, just resting. I kept glancing in the mirror, checking on him. We reached the beach just after noon. It was exactly how I remembered. Peaceful, wide open. The pier standing noble and weathered in the distance. I parked and opened the door. Toby stepped out slowly, stretched, then sniffed the sea air like it was an old friend. We walked along, the shore retracing steps taken years ago. I tried to remember where we'd built that castle. But Toby didn't hesitate. He turned toward the dunes and walked with purpose across the soft sand. Near a bend in the shoreline where the tall grasses swayed in the breeze, Toby stopped. He sniffed the ground, then looked at me. I knelt down, brushing away sand and seaweed until my hands hit something hard, a cracked piece of driftwood shaped like an X. My heart started to race. I dug with my hands until I uncovered a small, rusty metal tin. I opened it. Inside was a cheap plastic crown, one of those birthday party favors, wrapped around a note sealed in a sandwich bag. To the true king's loyal subject, if you're reading this, congratulations. You've reached the royal vault. Toby ruled this beach with wisdom and drool. May this treasure remind you that silly moments are sacred too. Don't take life too seriously, Jack. Laugh. Love big. Underneath was a photo. Me as a kid, covered in sand, wearing a crooked paper. Crown and holding Toby like he weighed nothing. My smile stretched wide. Dad must have snapped the picture right before the tide came in. I looked at Toby. Do you remember? He licked my arm, then flopped down beside me in the sand, tail sweeping softly like a paintbrush. We stayed until the tide rolled in, then made our way back slowly, the sun warming our backs. That night I found a cozy, dog-friendly cottage a few miles inland. It had a porch swing, a fire pit, and wide windows that let in the scent of pine and salt. Toby curled up by the fireplace and let out a deep, contented sigh. By candlelight, I read the last entry in Dad's notebook. If you've made it this far, you've remembered everything that matters, not because of the places, but because of the heart you carried into them. Toby knew, he always knew, and if you're reading this, he still does. There's nothing left to find now, Jack. Just keep walking with him. Wherever he goes next, follow. He'll show you what love looks like. I closed the book and looked at Toby. He opened one eye and wagged his tail once. Guess it's your story too, I whispered. You're the one who led us here. He didn't need to respond. The journey wasn't over, not even close. There might not be more treasures or letters, but there would be quiet walks, slow mornings, and the peace that comes when you've remembered something important. We weren't heading home just yet. The road was still calling, and Toby was, still leading the way. The next morning I didn't wake up to sunlight or birds. I woke up to Toby gently pawing at my arm. His leash was still at the foot of the bed, untouched, but his eyes were already on the door, like he knew where we were. Going? After breakfast, I helped him into the truck bed, where I'd padded it with blankets. I didn't know our next destination, but that was the point now. Toby would know. I started the engine and glanced in the mirror. All right, boss, you tell me. We left the beach town behind, driving inland. The roads were old and familiar, but I hadn't taken them in years. Some I only remembered by feel, like my hands and heart knew the way better than my head. With every turn, memories returned. A collapsed barn from a thunderstorm, the roadside diner where Toby stole a burger from Dad's plate, the gas station where Mom bought us winter popsicles just to make us laugh. We stopped outside a town called Millersville. The sign looked freshly painted, but the place felt frozen in time. I hadn't thought of it in over a decade. It wasn't on our usual route. We'd ended up there one summer when the car broke down. The local mechanic patched us up, and we stayed the night at a little inn. I found the inn without needing directions. Same white house, green shutters, and wraparound porch. I parked across the street and hesitated. Then Toby barked, once, sharp and sure. We walked up and knocked. A woman in her late 50s answered. She studied me, then smiled. You're one of the Fields boys, aren't you? You stayed here once with your dad and that little golden pup. Yeah, I said, blinking. I'm Jack, and this is Toby. You remember us? Of course I do. You helped me pick tomatoes out back. Your dad gave me a campfire cornbread recipe I still use every 4th of July. She brought out a photo album from behind the check-in desk. Inside was a photo of me and Dad on the porch swing, Toby stretched across both our laps. We looked sunburned, tired but happy. Then she flipped the page. There was a note, she said. Your dad gave it to me before you left, asked me to mail it to you someday, but I never got an address. She disappeared into a side room and came back holding a small yellowed envelope. It was still sealed. She handed it to me and I opened it gently. Jack, if you're back here, it means you've been walking with Toby. That's good. It means you're still following your heart. Don't stop now. There's a place just outside town, Miller's Trail. We never got to hike it that summer. We ran out of time. But I wanted to go there with you. If you make it, take Toby. Finish that walk for us. There was no signature, but I didn't need one. Toby was already standing, tail moving slow but sure. Miller's Trail was only a short drive from the inn. The trailhead was marked by a small wooden sign and a gravel patch for parking. I grabbed some water, a few treats, and Toby's leash, but didn't clip it on. The trail began gently, winding through trees, whispering in the breeze. It smelled like pine and wildflowers. Sunlight flickered across the path. Toby stayed right beside me, quiet and alert. We hiked in peaceful silence, passing mossy logs and dandelions. I imagined Dad walking with us, how he'd point at clouds or stop to watch ants. I did those things now for both of us. Halfway up, we came to a bench carved with M+T, maybe 2 young lovers. Toby sat beside it, then wandered toward some blackberry bushes. He sniffed until he found a hidden trail, half covered in vines. We followed it. After a few minutes ducking under branches, we stepped into a clearing round and quiet like a secret forest room. In the center sat a single flat rock. On it was a mason jar sealed with red wax. Inside, floating like a tiny treasure, was a kid's camping compass and a rolled-up note. I opened it. "Jack, wherever this ends, let it begin again. The compass. 'Tis yours. You always knew the way. Love isn't about getting there, it's about walking it together. So walk it again, and again, and again." There were no instructions, no map, just that. Toby lay in the clearing, eyes closed, nose to the wind. We stayed there a long time, just sitting together. When we finally made it back to the truck, the sun was low and the world had quieted. I didn't know where we were going next, but I didn't have to. Toby would take the lead, and this time, I'd follow. The next day, we drove with no plan, letting the road carry us like driftwood down a slow river. No force, no pressure, just trust. Toby sat up front now, his chin resting on the center console, eyes on the road. I kept my hand near him, not petting, just keeping in touch, like saying, "I'm still here." We passed small towns with names, painted in faded letters on crooked signs. I stopped whenever Toby stood up and looked out the window, tail flicking. That was his way of choosing. That's how we found Hallberg Grove, a tiny town with one stoplight, a post office, and 2 diners. We parked by a hardware shop, and Toby jumped down, nose to the ground, moving like he'd been here before. We passed neat houses and wind chimes until we reached a white community center with a faded mural of kids playing tag. Toby stopped at the steps and sat. Inside, it was quiet. A man behind the counter smiled and asked, "You looking for the dog training class?" "No, just following him," I said. The man nodded, walking around the desk. "If he brought you here, he might be remembering the youth fair. We used to host it here. There's a photo wall down the hall if you're curious." Toby followed me down a hallway filled with flyers and corkboards. At the end was a bulletin board titled Hallberg Grove Community Days 2009-2015. Second row, 5th photo in. I saw it, me holding a certificate. Dad beside me, proud, and Toby tongue out wearing a blue ribbon around his neck. A dog tricks contest we'd practiced for days. He rolled over, played dead, even rang a bell with his paw. I took a photo of the photo and showed it to the man. "You remember where they held the contests?" He scratched his chin. "Backfield behind the center. It's a garden now, but it used to be open." Toby was already heading that way. Out back, the grass was tall and wildflowers peeked through an old fence. The air smelled like warm earth and clover. Toby zigzagged gently, nose low, until he stopped. Right beneath an old oak tree, I knelt beside Toby. The ground was soft. Something was buried there. I dug with my hands until I uncovered a small wooden crate about the size of a shoebox. The lid came off easily. Inside was a laminated card with our names written boldly. Jack plus Toby, 2011 champions. There was also a metal whistle on a leather cord and a rolled-up yellow paper. I opened the note. "If you found this, you remembered how hard we laughed that day, how Toby tripped over his tail and still won. You didn't care about winning, just that he felt proud. That's what makes you different, Jack. You've always been someone dogs can trust. Don't lose that." Toby nudged the whistle and barked softly. I laughed and hung it around his neck. We stayed in Hallberg Grove that night. The local diner gave us leftover roast beef for free, and the motel nearby let dogs stay with no extra charge. Toby slept soundly, one paw resting on the whistle like it was a medal. In the morning, I checked Dad's old tin box of letters. There were 3 left. One said, "This one's for when you're ready to say goodbye to a place you never wanted. To leave. Not forever, just long enough to know how much it meant. Go to the overlook off Route 14, you'll know it when you see it." I knew exactly which one he meant. A rest stop built into the side of a bluff, where the valley spread out, below like a patchwork quilt. We had stopped there every year on our way to visit Grandma. It wasn't anything fancy, just a stone bench and a chain-link fence, but it felt sacred. We drove there in the afternoon. The air was cooler, and a breeze tugged at the edge of my flannel shirt. Toby walked straight to the edge and sat, tail thumping once. I sat beside him. Together we watched the wind ripple through the trees and the clouds drift by like slow thoughts. I read the letter again. This was the first place I realized I couldn't stop time. "You were growing up so fast. Toby too. I watched you both. Run in circles and wished I could hit pause. But life doesn't pause, it moves. What matters is noticing the view while you're in it. Sit here, breathe, remember you were happy." We stayed until the sun dipped behind the hills. That night, I found an old sleeping bag in the truck bed. I laid it out behind the cab and Toby climbed up beside me. We slept under the stars, no ceiling, no roof, just sky. He snored a little, like always, and I fell asleep with my hand resting on his back. Wherever we were going next didn't matter. I'd follow Toby. The next morning he woke up with a sneeze, his whole body jolting forward like only a dog can do. I blinked awake just in time to see him stretch long and low, his tail wagging slow. The sun rose fast, casting a golden light across the valley. For a while we just sat there in silence, two shapes on a truck bed beneath the sky, wrapped in yesterday's memories. The whistle around his neck swayed gently when he moved. He hadn't tried to take it off, which meant he was proud of it. We drove south, down small roads past farms and woods. I hadn't made a plan, but I never really did. The plan, always, was to follow Toby. By mid-morning we rolled into a place called Grant Hollow, so small it wasn't even on the GPS. Just a grocery store, a chapel, and a sign that read, "Welcome to the Hollow." Toby perked up at the chapel and let out a quiet bark. I parked nearby and looked around. It had a little bell tower and a garden out back, tucked behind a wooden fence covered in ivy. It looked like something out of a children's book. We walked the gravel path slowly. Toby sniffed the air and wandered toward a patch of daisies. Just past them, under a maple tree, was a stone bench with names carved into it. Families, maybe loved ones. I didn't know why he'd brought us there, until I spotted a small plaque nearby, in memory of the dogs who loved us, and the ones we still love. Toby stepped forward and lay down with a deep sigh. I sat beside him and rubbed behind his ears. I didn't cry, but something in me softened, the kind of ache that feels like love and thankfulness all at once. Inside the chapel, a silver-haired man was arranging hymnals. He looked up and smiled. "Visitors from out of town, just passing through," I said. "My dogs seem to know this place." He chuckled. "They always do. This garden. We take ashes here, keepsakes too. We don't advertise it, but dogs seem to lead folks here when it's time." I nodded. "My dad might have brought us here once. I was too young to remember." He studied Toby for a moment. "That whistle, was he in a youth contest?" I blinked. "Yeah, years ago." He smiled. "I judged a few of those. That's a winner's whistle. I don't forget dogs like him." Before we left, I scribbled a short note and tucked it behind the plaque. He's still leading me, still remembering what I forgot. "Thank you for keeping a space like this alive." We hit the road again by midday. The second to last letter in Dad's old tin box came next. "You're almost through, kiddo. If you've made it this far, I hope you've laughed more than you've cried. One last stop before the end. The treehouse." I knew exactly the one he meant. Not the old backyard one. That was long gone. He meant the one we built deep in the woods near the family cabin. The one tucked just far enough into the trees that it felt like a secret clubhouse. It took a while to get there. The road twisted like a question mark, and the truck didn't love the dirt path, but we made it. Toby jumped out and for the first time in days ran ahead. Not fast or wild, just happy. The treehouse was still there, barely. The wood had aged, but someone had fixed the rope ladder. Somebody had cared enough to keep it alive. Toby waited below while I climbed up. Everything felt smaller than I remembered, but only in size. Emotionally, it still felt huge. The drawings on the walls were faded, but still there. An old bean, bag, a flashlight, and in the corner a shoebox sealed with duct tape. I opened it. Inside was a folded map, marked with red X's for every place we'd been on this journey, every stop from Dad's letters, every memory with Toby. On top of the map was a note in Dad's handwriting. "Jack, Toby did what I couldn't. He stayed. He remembered. He brought you back to everything that matters. You've walked every step with him. Now just walk with him a little longer. There's no more treasure to find, because the real treasure is sitting beside you." I looked down, through the treehouse window. Toby was lying on his side in the shade, tail softly thumping against the dirt. We stayed in that clearing for hours. I came down, sat beside him, leaned against the tree, and watched the sun filter through the leaves. I still had one letter left, but I knew it wasn't time to open it. Toby would let me know. That night, Toby slept in the back of the truck while I sat near the treehouse. The last light stretched long shadows across the clearing. The final letter was in my jacket pocket, folded neatly, its edges soft from weeks of travel, but I wasn't ready, and Toby hadn't given me the sign. We stayed until the stars came out. Then we drove to a rest stop nearby. I parked under a crooked oak. No lights, just the sound of crickets and wind. Toby hopped out, stretched and curled beside the front tire, chin on his paws. I grabbed my sleeping bag, laid it down beside him, and joined him. We didn't say anything. We didn't have to. In the morning, I made coffee with my camp stove and poured some into the lid, just like Dad used to. Toby watched me, eyes half closed, tail barely wagging. He seemed tired that day, not in pain, just older, slower to get up, more careful with each step. This time I didn't ask him to lead. I just drove. We passed familiar signs, still water, Pine Hollow, even the overlook off Route 14. Then 3 hours later, we arrived at the one place we hadn't gone back to, home. The garage looked just like I'd left it, boxes half unpacked, a broom leaning in the corner. The old box, the one Toby once guarded like gold, was now empty. Its contents were part of us now, memories brought back into the light. Inside, Toby padded to the living room and lay on the rug, his head resting on his paws. The red flannel blanket was still folded on the couch. I draped it over him. That evening, Susan came by. She hadn't seen Toby in weeks. Her face softened when she did. She sat beside him and rubbed his ears. "You've been busy, huh, old boy?" she whispered. "Took your dad on the grand tour." We talked for hours. I told her everything. The map in the treehouse, the photo in Halberg Grove, the jar at Miller's Trail, the whistle, the fairgrounds. She listened quietly, eyes glistening. "You need to write this down," she said at last. "All of it. This isn't just your story, it's his too." I nodded. "I will." After she left, I sat beside Toby with the last letter in my lap, still unopened, still waiting. I looked at him. "Not yet?" He blinked slowly. No tail wag, no bark. So I waited. The next morning was still. I woke before sunrise and made scrambled eggs for both of us. He ate slowly, but finished everything. Then he walked to the back door and sat. I opened it. He stepped out onto the porch. He looked at me, then at the yard, then back at me, and I knew. We drove north, back to where it all started, the cabin. The drive took most of the day. The trees had turned gold and rust, painting the world in autumn colors. When we reached the gravel drive, Toby stood, ears perked. We went inside. Everything was just like we'd left it. The notebook on the table, the letters back in the box, the photo album still open to the picture of us in the truck. Long ago, Toby lay down by the fireplace. I lit it. Then I sat across from him, pulled the final letter from my pocket and quietly unfolded it. I didn't read it aloud. I let the letter sit in my lap, the words sinking in. If this is the last one, then you've done everything right. This letter isn't about a place, it's about a moment. And this is that moment. Just sit with him. No more clues, no more trails, just stillness, just being. That's all he ever wanted from you. That's love. I looked over at Toby. He wasn't asleep. He was watching me. And in his eyes I saw everything I needed to know, so I lay down next to him on the rug. He shifted a little, rested his chin on my arm and let out a breath. I didn't cry, not then, because this wasn't goodbye. This was just another part of our walk, and I wasn't done walking it with him. Not yet. The next morning, the fire was just glowing embers. The cabin was quiet, except for the soft cracking of old logs in the hearth. Toby was still beside me, warm under the red flannel blanket. I hadn't moved all night. I hadn't wanted to. He opened one eye and gave the faintest wag of his tail, slow, gentle, like he was saying, "I'm still here." I sat up and laid my hand on his back. He leaned into it without a sound. A little after 7, sunlight streamed through the front windows, painting a wide gold stripe across the floor. Toby shifted toward the light like it was the most important thing in the world. I made breakfast and shared it with him, just like always. Then we sat outside on the porch, watching the trees sway like slow ocean waves. Birds hopped between branches. A squirrel dashed across the rail, and for a second, Toby's ears perked. Just for a second. We stayed there for hours. I read from Dad's old notebook, entries I'd skipped before. Stories about how he always knew Toby was special, how he believed dogs see the world the way we forget to. Dad had written, "Toby isn't just a dog. He's a reminder of what home feels like, of what loyalty really means. He's the echo of everything good." By midday, Toby was tired. Not just sleepy, but tired all the way through. He lay down again, head on his paws, breathing slow and steady. I put the blanket beside him. He didn't lift his head, just gave one soft sigh. I sat with him and told him everything. Every stop we made, every treasure we found, every moment we shared. I told him how proud I was, how thankful, how much I loved him. Then I opened my phone and played some of the voice recordings I'd made since we left home. Ever since that first day, when he bit me over the box, I'd saved thoughts, his reactions, even the quiet, the sound of the road in the background. I played the one from the fairgrounds, the moment I found the ribbon. My voice cracked, but I was smiling. I watched Toby's ear twitch just slightly at the sound. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out the photo from Stillwater, the one of the two of us on the dock. I held it where he could see. His eyes didn't move, but I swear he knew. By sunset, his breathing slowed. I stayed quiet beside him. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, he let out one last deep breath, and then nothing. I stayed with him long after. There was no hurry, no place I had to be. Just this, just him. When the stars came out and the sky turned still, I wrapped him in the blanket and carried him to the trail behind the cabin, the one we'd walked a dozen times. At the fork where the trees opened into a clearing, I stopped. The moon shone down on a soft patch of earth. I dug slowly, gently. When I laid him down, I placed the whistle beside him, the compass from the jar, the photo from the dock, and the last letter. I covered it all and smoothed the dirt. Then I sat with him one more time. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The next morning I returned to the cabin and gathered every letter, photo, and note. I started putting it all together, scanning, organizing, writing it down like Susan told me to. Toby's story. Our story. I stayed the whole week finishing it, and when I finally left the cabin for good, I took one last look at the trail. Then I climbed into the truck, turned the key, and said out loud, "Lead the way, buddy." It was quiet, but I swear, I felt his tail wag just once, and I smiled because he'd already shown me the way.